I wanted to share with you about a big failure I had this past week and how it's really a good lesson in resilience. So I entitled this video, How to Be Resilient, Lessons from a Live Stream Fail. I hope it's a blessing for you. So this past week, I had this live stream video all set up. I had an interviewee ready to go. And really, I struggled a lot with what ended up happening. It was very frustrating, and I think this is going to bless you as you hear the story and how it really is a lesson for me, a lesson for all of us. So I went to live stream my first interview this past Thursday night, and I found out the audio for the interview didn't work. So the interviewee's on Zoom talking, and no one can hear them through the live stream. So it was very frustrating and embarrassing to be live. People are watching, and it's not working. The pastor who I was interviewing was talking, and no one who was watching live could hear him. I tried to get it working by doing some searches, and I'm live on the camera doing this, changing some computer settings, pulling up a YouTube video tutorial, and nothing was working. So after a full week of preparing for the interview, doing all these technical things with some of you might know OBS and other programs on the computer, even setting up the studio, which you'll see here is different from other videos I've been working on. I promoted the live stream on social media. I have a whole bunch of different accounts that I've posted to. And, I prayed about it ahead of time. I prayed with a guy who I lead men's ministry with before the video. Also, we were together. And so we're all thinking we've prepared as best as possible. And the live stream was still a failure. It just didn't work. So I cut it off after about 10 minutes. And it was embarrassing, After the fact, I closed up everything, and I had to admit that I was frustrated and angry. I mean, I know we're all religious and everybody wants to act like things don't happen, but really, you got to just say, look, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. A big problem happened. There's no way you can avoid it. I told my wife about it, and then I went to the prayer meeting we usually have after the videos with our local men's group here. And some of those guys were encouraging me about, don't worry about it, it's okay. And we were joking a little bit. And I even joked a bit as well. But still, it's frustrating. And I had to admit that, I was going to have to be resilient to come out of this situation. I mean, maybe I won't make another video. Maybe I won't make a video for a while. How are you going to react? This is what I was asking myself. So the next day I regrouped a bit, and, I prayed and also took some steps toward pressing on and not letting it keep me down. So I called another potential interviewee for another live stream that maybe I could do in the future, trying to sort of go forward from where I had been stopped the previous night. And, I didn't think it was good to keep going over this failure in my mind, like, oh, look at how bad it was and you should be embarrassed and all that stuff. So I tried to be resilient according to how the Bible teaches it, not just kind of in any way. There's many ways people will tell you about how to be resilient. But, if you look at a passage like Matthew 7:24-27, I'll put the passage on the screen, but to summarize it, really it's Jesus discussing about two different houses, one being built on a rock and the other being built on sand. And he's trying to describe how to be a house that's built on a rock, because that's the one that doesn't fall down in a storm. And so if you want to check out another video on the same subject, this Matthew 7, the same passage, you can go to this video on contentment that I've made. I'll put a link in the description. You just click up top on the video and it'll take you there. So this passage, Matthew 7, has some good content regarding resilience and Jesus' strategy for being resilient. So one important observation about what Jesus says in Matthew 7 is that he tells us that we will face storms. You see, there are some preachers nowadays and some other kinds of philosophies, even non-Christian, people trying to help you with your life and life coaching, and that they'll try to minimize the fact that storms are a part of our life, or try to say that if you do this certain thing or believe this certain way, you won't face storms. But that's not really what what the world is like. We will face storms. We will face suffering. We will face problems. And Jesus didn't tell us otherwise. He said exactly that. You will face these things. And so we learn that God does not stop all storms from coming our way. We will face them. And this passage is trying to teach us how to be resilient when we face storms, not how to guarantee that we won't face storms. It's quite a big distinction. And I think it's important that when we look at the New Testament, we look at what Jesus said. He was pretty honest with us and straightforward from what I believe. I think that, being a person who acknowledges you're going to face problems, I think this is a person who's leading us in the right direction. We wouldn't want to listen closely to somebody who says, no, I got to wait for you to not face any problems. It's like, no, that's not real life. I mean, real life is problems coming on a regular basis. Another important observation about the passage is that each of the two men already have houses when the storm comes. You see, when you're facing a storm well and being resilient, you have to have your approach to life in place before the storm comes. You can't wait for when it comes to sort of build your house. You need to have the house already constructed. Now, there is a way of thinking about it, like each of us does have an approach to life that we've put together. But some of us, our approach to life is a little more or less well thought out. And so I think that this passage helps us to see, we've got to get our house in order, and not just the house itself, but where is that house located? I mean, what's the foundation under that house? And that's what we're going to talk about now. We need to think about what foundation we have under the house. What underpins our approach to facing problems in life? None of us can face a storm well with the wrong type of foundation. So our passage guides us in how to put our house on the right foundation. And this way, we're prepared for when the storm comes. Jesus said that the wise man who built his house on the rock is the one who hears Jesus' words and does them. See, the right foundation is explained right there. It's hearing and doing what Jesus says. It sounds very simple, but this is what Jesus' message in this passage is. Hear and do what he says. The rock that you should build your house on to make you resilient is hearing and doing what Jesus says. That's the approach. That's what you should have as your foundation to set your house on. As simple as that sounds, though, it is not widely accepted for people that we know and people in our communities, people in our country. If you look at people and you talk to people and you sort of seek out more, try to ask them questions, have them explain what are they really using as their foundation for being resilient, I think you'd find that there are not that many that think that hearing and doing what Jesus says is the approach that they use. Even in churches, I don't think it's that common. I think most people are using another way that they've learned to rely on over time that's worked for them, but not necessarily hearing and doing what Jesus says. There may also be people that are doing it without consciously thinking of it, but I really think that most of us need to be at a conscious level about this. We need to be able to think, what is it that my house is sitting on? And we have to make decisions about how we approach things so that we can be resilient. And knowing that the strategy is hearing and doing what Jesus said is just the beginning. You could say that you now know the strategy, but the question comes after that, how do you do it? How do you do this approach of knowing and doing what Jesus says? And really that's an implementation of the strategy. And so we first have to know what Jesus said. If we're going to hear and do what he said, we got to know what his words are. So to do that, we've got to read our Bible and we've got to listen to teachers who explain the Bible, because without learning Jesus' words, we really don't know what he said. And how can we have his foundation as knowing and doing what he said if we don't even know those things that he said? And I think that some of us think we know what Jesus said, but don't know very much of that. And so an example I have is this one buddy of mine. It's quite a while back now. When I was talking with him about the Bible and religion and all that, he was telling me that he was pretty sure that Jesus said that God helps those who help themselves. This is something he told me. And I said, I've been reading the Bible for a couple of years, but I'm not really sure where it says God helps those who help themselves. So I was hoping he would be able to tell me, but he wasn't able to tell me because he didn't really know for sure either. Well, it's been 20 years now since that conversation, and I still haven't found where it says God helps those who help themselves. You see, there's a common knowledge that we think and we kind of fall back to that we have heard in different ways, but it's not always biblical knowledge. It might just be some kind of knowledge that somebody has said and we thought, oh, it sounds good. It really may not be that we know a lot about what Jesus has said. We sort of think we know, but we're not really that sure, or we wouldn't be able to really be confident to find it in the Bible if asked. I think when pressed, it would be difficult for many of us to be sure that what we think Jesus said is really what Jesus said. See, a lot of our common sense and morals and the way we conduct ourselves is more cultural. That's from friends, family, and our communities, instead of biblical, which is what Jesus said to us. So we've got to make that distinction, and I think we've got to really seek after the Word of God. When it comes to this live stream fail that I just experienced this week, I had already heard some words of Jesus that I was able to fall back on. So the way to have my house on the rock and to not have my house fall down, I needed to know what Jesus said. So one of the ways that I know what Jesus said is from a passage in Ephesians 4:26. It says, "Be angry and do not sin." So this passage here is something that I can use to say, I know what Jesus has said. And in this case, it's through the Apostle Paul. But if I know what the New Testament said, then I can start to do the approach that Jesus mentioned about knowing, hearing his words and doing them. So, for 20 years now, I've been trying to deal with how I express anger, because I grew up being a person who really wasn't be angry and do not sin. I was a person who was be angry and sin. I mean, that's how I was. I was an angry person a lot, and I was constantly making mistakes, hurting people, hurting myself by sinning, all the time when I was angry. It was just a normal way of expressing anger for me. So for the past couple of decades now, I've been working on hearing these words of Jesus, be angry and do not sin, and put them into practice as well. By the time I was frustrated and angry about this live stream not working, I also had heard Jesus' words about perseverance. So when I'm thinking about the words that Jesus has spoken on different subjects and other New Testament passages, I have to think about, be angry and do not sin. That's one of them. But there's also a passage about perseverance. In Romans 5:4, Paul teaches about how suffering produces perseverance and perseverance produces character. So this teaching here is one of the ones that helps us to see that God values working through a problem or persevering in order to get through a situation you're in. So when faced with suffering, where something isn't going my way, I know that working through the problem is the right way to approach it, because I know that passage from the Bible. So be angry and do not sin, and perseverance produces character are two relevant teachings for my situation, where the live stream interview did not go how I wanted it to. And it's not just knowing, remember from our passages, hearing the words and doing them. So it's not just knowing what Jesus said, but it's also doing them that makes us the wise man who built his house on the rock. So we have to move on from knowing to doing. So in my case, I had to do persevering produces character. I couldn't just know that was the case. So I tried to persevere by attempting to solve that live stream problem as it was happening. I was live on the air. People are watching, and I told the interviewer that we're having problems with the audio. So then I spent some time on it. I tried to fix it with doing some setting changes on my computer, pull up a YouTube video. I was live on the air with a YouTube video on my phone at the same time. Kind of a strange situation, but at the end I just couldn't fix it fast enough, so I had to call it. The interview was over, and I felt defeated, and I did practice persevering, but it wasn't able to fix the problem. But I can be confident that hearing and doing Jesus' words, in that case, I was able to hear the words about persevering, and then I also was able to do them. But the real test for me was be angry and do not sin. So I could have done things like I grew up doing, which is swearing, throwing stuff, yelling at people. When you get angry, what do you do? And maybe you can relate to this kind of behavior. But really, I needed to do what Jesus said. I couldn't just hear it in this case. So I had to be angry and do not sin. So the way to do that would have been difficult for me, but I still had to consciously think about, okay, how am I going to now act now that I'm all frustrated and upset about what has happened? So even though I've been at this for many years, I still have to consciously do what Jesus said. You can't really do it sort of with a lack of control, lack of consciously thinking about what you're doing. It's not really fully automatic. I know some people are hoping for like an automatic, behavior where you don't even have to think about it. It's just natural to me. You hear these people, it's almost like I'm so holy. It's just natural to me. It's like, not really. I mean, you have to think about it. You have to make decisions. You have to do something the right way by actively doing it. It's not by accident is what I really think is my experience. And so I have to really think about not swearing, not throwing anything, not screaming at somebody. I've got to sort of take another choice, take another, it's sort of like going to a fork in the road and taking the side that is like what Jesus has said, not on my own and not the way I grew up doing it. At the prayer meeting after the live stream, I joked with some of the guys. They joked with me a little bit. That was a way of, calming down things and taking a different approach. I even joked about that I destroyed my whole studio. I threw everything around, but I mean, I actually didn't do that. But that's what I would be pretty certain I would have done at some point in my life, especially when I was much younger. So I say that I felt that in this time I was able to accept that God had given me this storm, which is something I wasn't always able to do. Admitting that I've got this problem that God didn't take away and being able to accept that that's the case I'm in. Those are the circumstances I'm in. And I'm not always successful at being the house that doesn't fall down in the midst of a storm. I sin, I yell at people or, swear at somebody. I don't know, I might do something wrong like that. But in this case, I was able to be pretty resilient and I was happy about that. I really try to take steps forward as well. So to be resilient, I think part of it's taking steps to move past what had happened. So not just how you act in the situation, but then following up. So following up since then, I've tried to work on a technical problem and I called a couple people about doing interviews. So maybe in the future I can do some more. And I'm hoping that it goes better next time. But I also have in the back of my mind that God doesn't prevent all storms. Remember, we saw that earlier. And since God doesn't prevent all storms, you have to realize, and I have to realize that there may be another one, and it could be related to this same thing. Maybe I try to do some of these live stream broadcasts and some other big problem happens. I don't know. I don't know what God has for me. But what I do know is that I can hear and do what Jesus says, and that's my resilient approach to these kinds of things. So I will have storms, and I have to accept them. And I also have to hear and do what Jesus says, but it's not easy. And I follow Jesus imperfectly. I think that many of us, if we're honest, we follow Jesus imperfectly, but we can press on, and we can continue to try to hear and do what he says as we face different situations. I believe that over time, we'll see growth in our resilience as well, and that the growing in resilience honors God, and that we can give God the credit for how he's changed us. We can tell people, hey, God has helped me to get through some situations. Let me tell you about that. And when you tell how God is good and what God has done for you, that honors God. That's what we say, glorifies God. And so that's what God wants. He wants glory because he deserves that glory. So I wanted to encourage you with this story of what just happened to me this week. And I think that not just me, but, we can all see growth in our resilience, and we can be the house that doesn't fall down in a storm. I think that growing in resilience honors God, and that we give him credit. That's really something that he is most honored by. I want to mention too, before I close out here, that if this video blessed you, you can push the like button, you can subscribe. There's going to be more videos like this. There's also series videos. We just did a series called Where is God? Discusses what God is doing in the midst of difficulties like the current health crisis that's going on with the global pandemic. And if you subscribe and you push the bell icon, you'll get notifications of new videos. So whether it's a recorded video or a live stream, which we do live streams now on Thursday nights, you'll be able to get notifications of those. And tell your friends about these videos if they're a blessing for you. And I hope that you grow in resilience through this kind of thing, and that over time you'll be able to hear and do what Jesus says in order to be that house that doesn't fall down in the storm. Thanks for watching, and God bless.